Sometimes people say dumb things. What is a dumb thing to say, though? Is it something that is incorrect? Is it something that is just widely accepted as being generally known? Is it saying something that is so moronic, so foolish, so stupid, that it has to be called dumb? Wait, couldn't it be called those other things? I don't know. But today, we are going to explore the world of dumb with the help of Mark.
On today's episode of Stupid Things Atheists Say, we're going to talk about if you need religion to be a good person, you're a bad person. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. To begin with just a few simple disclaimers. First off, nothing I say means that I think all atheists are stupid or idiots or anything. There are intelligent atheists who actually think in some reasonable fashion. And if you want a good example, check out Zarathustra's Serpent, who's got a YouTube channel. Smart guy. Had him on my channel for some really good conversations. Puts out stuff that's worth paying attention to.
Yes, this is not meant to insult people, even though it's going to insult people. But no, there are smart atheists. This only applies to the dumb atheists, which you might be one of. But don't take offense, because if you are taking offense, then that means you're probably one of the dumb ones.
So, there's an example. And also, I am not in any way saying that all atheists say, any particular thing here. It's just a thing that I've seen a bunch. This one actually was, the exact form of this was recommended by a viewer. I've seen variations of this, because it's essentially the flip side of the you don't need religion to be a good person thing. And to some degree, it's also related to the whole, you don't need meaning, life can have the meaning that you give it idea. They're all related to each other because it seems to stem from this bizarre inability to understand that ethics and meaning are related to each other. Because if to take a really simple example of this, and I don't want to belabor this because I've talked about this in other videos, but if a living human being doesn't mean something different than a corpse does, they mean the same thing, then turning the one into the other can't be bad.
So I'm sure at some point we'll get to the part where he explains why it is dumb to say that if you need religion to be good, that you're a bad person. That's going to happen, right? In this video? I'm sure that he'll get to that point. We're not there yet, but I'm sure we'll get there eventually.
And so it's only bad because a corpse does actually have a different meaning than a living human being does. And this goes through everything. I mean, the nature of ethics, to have a rational ethics, has to be based upon the nature of the things involved. And in order to have a nature, you must have been given this nature. As a contingent being, you must be given this nature by whatever gave you your being.
You must be given this nature by whatever gave you your being. So you have to be given the nature by your parents? I guess? But what if you're adopted? I'd love for Mark to show us how these ethical systems all align with the idea that he's putting forth. But although I'd love for him to do that, and I know that he won't, it doesn't matter to the conversation at hand. All he's done here is assert that your ethical structure has to come from something else. Basically, I'm guessing he means God. But that's something that he believes, not something that he has proven to be true. So what he believes is independent of the argument at hand, which is supposed to be why it is dumb to say that if you need religion to be good, that you're bad.
If you don't actually have this meaning, then there's no ethics that follows in a completely meaningless environment. So this idea that comes up, though, and you see this, there are a bunch of a surprising number, it should be surprising, I suppose, maybe it shouldn't be surprising, number of atheists who will say roughly something to the effect of, you're good, I'm going to just translate rather than go to the particulars. There are a lot of variations on it. They're all rhetorical and they're all pretty wrong. And they all basically amount to you are good because you have instincts to be good, not because you rationally choose the good in the world.
Okay, we get it. You think that you have to have God for ethics to matter. You're not saying it outright, but that's what you're saying. I think that it's fair to infer that. Okay, whatever. We don't believe in God, so this is supposed to be talking about why it is dumb that atheists say this thing, and simply asserting your own beliefs doesn't get us to understand why you think that saying this is dumb. Then you go on to complain about atheists that apparently say this idea that you're good because it's your nature. So what? If that's the case, if that's what is true, then that's what is true. And it's interesting because there are theists that have said that the moral law is written on your heart by God, which would mean that being good is ingrained in your nature. But for whatever reason, we are able to deny that nature. Whether that's because biological evolution doesn't actually produce the thing that you're saying that atheists say that it does do, or because God allows free will, either way, you're still left with the fact that even though we're predisposed to do good, we'll do bad anyways, occasionally. So, what's going on there? There's something that is missing from that equation. It's almost like neither of those are really adequate to explain the phenomenon of human nature. Perhaps because we are in the weeds of vagueness and not specifics.
And you see various things put in support of it, statistics that are brought up about how it doesn't really matter what you believe, all people act the same, and these statistics are lacking in all sorts of ways. Who they're actually comparing, how true they are. They're often, very, very cherry-picked sorts of stuff. They invariably avoid confounders and so on.
So, Mark, I have a question for you. Are you an expert in statistics or statistical gathering? Do you have any relevant degree in that field? Do you understand how to conduct statistical polling or polling in general? Do you have papers that you've reviewed and seen if they are true? Have you examined the methodologies of these studies? Have you written anything to counter those studies and published that for peer review? No? Well, then your vague statements about the statistics that you have not cited is irrelevant. Who cares? If you think that there's something wrong with it, then do something about it. Write up a paper that outlines the problem of those statistics. Do a metadata analysis on it and prove your point via the scientific method. And at least cite what statistics you're talking about. That would be good so that we can know what it is specifically you have an axe to grind with. However, none of this has anything to do with the topic at hand. So, Mark, please, for the love of humanity, get to the point.
Anyway, so you'll see various statistics brought up like this, but the basic idea at its core is, roughly speaking, that it is normal for people to just instinctively be good and not be tempted to be bad. And that if you actually need to be told what is good, if your instincts do not just always unerringly lead you to be good, such that you are good without effort, then there is something wrong with you. And that's just so wrong. No, I mean, there is a vague instinct to it's got the slightest kernel of truth, and the slightest kernel of truth is that we're a fallen species, and so yes, we should in fact always do everything correctly. Although an unfallen human being will do everything rationally, they just aren't going to be, they're not going to regard temptation in an inordinate fashion such that they're pulled away from what they rationally know to be good. But it's not like all the feelings and instincts of an unfallen human being being reasonably, especially of one habituated to the good, being directed towards goodness is going to mean that they are not rationally engaged in choosing the good. So it's a really tiny little kernel of truth there. And in this fallen world, it's just idiotic. People are bad.
We get it, Mark. You're a Christian. I don't care. I don't care what your beliefs are. They are wholly irrelevant to me. Oh, it's a fallen world. Oh, we're sin and wah wah blah blah. That's all baloney. There is no such thing as sin. It's not a fallen world. We're not these wretched things that the Bible pretends that we are, because we disobeyed God, and that pissed God off because God needed us to obey it, and we didn't. So then sin entered the world, and it's not God's fault, even though it is God's fault, and etc., etc. We know the story. We don't believe in the story. We don't believe in your fable, in your myth, in your fairy tales, in your folklore. We do not believe in it, Mark. This video is hypothetically directed towards the atheists to get them to stop saying this thing that you think is dumb. Why in the world would we care about your worldview? You should know that we don't. The whole point is you would need to prove that your worldview is true. That would require stuff that you're not doing here. Valid and sound argument, empirical evidence, repeatable testing, something. You would need to present some methodology that is separate from your worldview. All you're doing is saying, well, it makes sense in my view, but it doesn't make sense in their view. So the reason that it's dumb, you could have saved us a lot of time by just saying, it's dumb to say this thing because your worldview is wrong and my worldview is right. That's what it boils down to, doesn't it, Mark?
People are really bad. People do very bad things all the time. And if you haven't seen it, look up the Milgram experiment. There are a number of psychological experiments that were actually really interesting. I mean, they're not without their faults, right? There are various ones, but like the ones where some people were the students were divided up into prison guards and people in prison, or I can't remember the name of the one, but where people were administering electric shocks to people and would go to now the person was acting, but they go to great lengths and so on. These were all done in the aftermath of World War II, and people wonder, well, how could the Nazis be as evil as they were?
Okay, so we're down this rabbit hole. Sure, why not? So the Stanford prison experiment and the Miller experiments are extraordinarily interesting in that they demonstrate how humans can be affected by authority and by having power over others. Far from showing me that this proves that humans are evil, I think that this shows that humans will do odd things when put in positions of power and authority without checks and balances to keep them in line, and that humans, when told by an authority to do wrong, will do it despite them believing that it is wrong. That reminds me of some story in the Bible where an authority figure tells somebody to kill their firstborn son, and the guy goes to do it, even though he knows it's wrong. But the moral of that story is it's good to do what the authority wants you to do if that authority is God. I don't know. It just seems to me like we're getting mixed messages of some sort there. But what do I know? And since you seem so interested in these sort of experiments, perhaps you should read about Princess Alice is Watching You, in which children are told that an invisible person, Princess Alice, is observing their behavior to see what effect this has on them cheating at various tasks. Invariably, most children will behave as if an adult is present, even though there is none, and will cheat less than they would otherwise. Although, as children get older and some children are more skeptical, they tend to cheat anyways. It's almost like an invisible person that we cannot prove is there can affect us, but perhaps only affects those with childlike minds. Wasn't there something in the Bible that says to be like a child? I don't know if that has anything to do with anything. It just randomly came to mind. I'm sure it has no bearing on this conversation at all. Much like these experiments have very little to do with whatever the bleep you're trying to get to. But since we're down this rabbit hole, why not? Go check out that experiment. Perhaps you might learn something about human nature and belief in invisible beings.
And they started doing experiments to see, like, well, could Americans ever be that evil? And the answer's like, obviously, yes. Of course they can. The idea that there's something like special magic evil about the Nazis, that they weren't human beings who, and so the rest of us could never be tempted to be that evil. It's, so stupid. Obviously, we can all be tempted to be very evil, and given the right temptation, a lot of people will give into that temptation and be really freaking evil.
I seem to recall an event that happened in America because a bunch of people believed that doing something that I view as horrible would send them directly to paradise. And they did so based on religious beliefs. That's an interesting thing. So, given the temptation that they're going to be rewarded by a divine being that has zero proof of it, those people did horrible evil because religion. But on the flip side, if we could use religion to get them to do good, then who cares if it's true or not? We're just tempting people to do good with an empty promise of an afterlife that we can't prove. But as long as we get them to do good, what does it matter what lies we tell?
The idea, and this kind of gets to a lot of the internet atheists that you will see, because I'm primarily talking about internet atheists. They are fairly well-to-do, like middle class, upper middle class, some form of middle class at least.
The flying fuck are you talking about? Internet atheists. What the? You're an internet theist. What? Why? What? They're middle class? How do you know that? Did you take a survey? How do you know what the income is of atheists? Why would that even matter? What does any of this have to do with anything? Mark, what the bleep?
They're comfortable by historical standards. They are rich. They don't face temptation all that frequently because, like, most of their basic wants are all just sort of like automatically met with minimal effort.
What the flying F, Mark? Are you suggesting that middle class, upper middle class, rich people are less tempted than poor people? By what metric? What measurement? How would you know that to be the case? How do you know that that's true? Do you know that that's true? I don't think that you do know that it's true. I think that you're just asserting it because it sounds good. Oh, they're not as tempted as anyone else. So They don't really have to face the temptations, so they don't know what those temptations are like. Therefore, something. Wow. Incoherent, completely unsupported, and utterly insane. Well done.
Their parents took care of them for a very long time. May still be for a lot of them on the internet. Atheists, they find older ones, but they do tend to be fairly young. The partially related to the way that atheism does not have a great retention rate. It people just figure out that it's wrong pretty often. But anyway, in any event, they were.
Citation required. How about a study that shows that that's true? Some studies show that non-affiliated belief is on the rise, which isn't necessarily atheism, but isn't necessarily tied to any given religion. And there are a few studies that I happen to find that show that just because somebody has the parents that are atheists doesn't necessarily mean that they will remain an atheist. I don't know if that's the same as becoming an atheist and staying an atheist or not, but that study, as far as I know, has not been conducted. But maybe you have some study that you would like to link us to, Mark. Right? You have citations, right? You're not just pulling this out your ass, right? You didn't just do a quick Google search and found that there's at least one Christian website that says that this is true, right? You actually did some research on this, right? Right? Not that this has anything to do with anything, but how would it work that atheists would discover that they're wrong? Would that mean that they believed in a God, or would it mean that they believed in your God? Because if your God's the actual God and they just happen to believe in God, then they still would be wrong, right, Mark? I don't think you thought this through.
Had their needs generally taken care of, and then and anyway, where they are now tends to be doing fairly decently by the historical standards of the world, such that none of them particularly are really worried where their next meal is coming from, and not the one after that or the one after that. There isn't. Most of them are not in any sort of immediate fear of death from violence and so on. So atheists in general tend to be pretty darn comfortable, and comfortable people don't really ever imagine themselves doing anything wrong because they don't foresee temptation. And a lot of the things they do wrong, they don't really see the consequences of, so they don't really think of themselves as doing those wrong things. Because, people ordinarily will screw each other over all the time and then just don't see the consequences of screwing each other over. So,
Hey, there's Mark face-palming himself, knowing that he's so wrong that he has to face-palm himself. That's what my narrative is from now on. Mark can just assert things without any proof. So can I. All that equipment behind him is so that Mark can go kill people, which is perfectly fine in his worldview because he can then be forgiven by his deity. Mark's allowed to kill as many people as he wants. It's not bad. God told him it was fine to do. That's what Mark does on a regular basis. He goes out and shoots people with a bow and arrow. That's just fact. Oh, how do I know that? Well, 'cause I said it was. That's how I know that. How do I know it's fact? Well, I just said that it was fact. That's how I know. And those light switches over there, those turn on the torture devices that Mark has in his basement. How do I know that Mark has a basement and that those switches turn on the equipment down there? Well, because I asserted that I did. So therefore I do know that. 'Cause that's how things work now.
yeah, it's kind of a weird thing where what you have is basically comfortable people in happy circumstances who can't imagine, who don't really imagine these things ever changing, can't really imagine temptation, and therefore don't ever think they'd give into it, and then sort of pat themselves on the back for just being lucky.
How do you know that? Hello? Hello, Mark? How do you know that? How do you know that? How do you know that's true? How do you know? How do you know that? Hello, hello, hello. Do you know? How do you know that?
There, it's mostly rhetorical rather than thought out.
And that summarizes your entire video so far, Mark. It's mostly rhetorical and not well thought out. We'll continue in part 2 when I do more complaining about what Mark says, where he mishmashes, gish gallops, salad words, and doesn't edit his way into not explaining why the thing that he said that atheists say is dumb. Join me in part 2. Or don't. I don't know. Do whatever. It doesn't matter. We're all programmed to do good. Unless we're rich, in which case we don't have to worry about doing good because we'll do good because we're rich. And we're not tempted to do bad because rich people never do anything bad, I guess. And but then if you're an atheist online, obviously you're middle class. And we know that because there's these studies that they show that people that, by the way, these other studies, they showed people are bad, so that proves my point. I can't even remember the name of the studies, but and nor will I link them or anything, but they're there, and the data here that shows I'm wrong, that data is wrong. I'm not going to prove it's wrong, but it's just wrong, and you can know that it's wrong because God says so, I guess. And then atheists are bad and they're dumb, but not some atheists. Some atheists are smart, but not you. You're dumb.